Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Become a patron today. Patreon.com/wordballoon. For as little as $3 a month, you can really help Word Balloon keep going and get exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Here's what you get. The Word Balloon Magazine, a digital publication packed with behind-the-scenes interviews, commentary, and insights from your favorite comic book creators, writers, and pop culture stars. And you can join the Word Balloon Book Club. Join Brian Bendis and me for a live monthly discussion of a hand-picked graphic novel. It's a great way to dig deeper into storytelling, art, and comic book history. Word Balloon has been a home for creator conversations since 2005. Your support helps cover production costs and keeps these interviews going strong. So if you love comics, creators, and long-form conversations, become a patron today. Be one of the League of Word Balloon listeners. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress with you. I'm really excited today to talk about a brand new book edited by Jim Beard, a book that is a bunch of great essays from comic book writers, but also pop culture analysts about the various works of Jack Kirby. And along with Jim, we've got our good friend Paul Kupperberg with us as well. And gentlemen, welcome, and I'm really glad to talk to you today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Always fun.
I wanted to get started and also acknowledge, Jim, that I've enjoyed your other books that you've written over the years. You did a fantastic book, 14 Miles from Gotham City. Am I saying it right?
Gotham City, 14 miles, close. Yeah.
The sign that we would see as the Batmobile would pass the Batcave on the way to Commissioner Gordon.
Indeed, yep. And then I have 3 other Batman books, the Subterranean Blue Grotto series.
That's fantastic.
Those are episode guides with, but with a critical episode guides, I guess would be, which are a lot. And I've got pieces in all 4 of those books because Jim's not allowed to publish without me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah,
this is great, though.
Now,
this is great, truly. I mean, because again, the list of guys, and then some of them I will talk to you about a couple of the various essays I wanted to cover. Van Allen Plexo, long Avengers commentator, has his thing in there about the Avengers, and Keith DeCandido does a great piece on, and I'm trying to remember, does he do the Kirby tech stuff?
He does the Captain America 2.0.
Yes, and the bicentennial issue as well, right?
Yeah, Jack's return to Captain America. Yeah, Bob Greenberger does the Nick Fury Shield tech thing.
That's great. No, it's excellent, man. And again, these are some of my favorite people. They have been guests on Word Balloon in the past, and I'm sure will be in the future as well. So why this book now, Jim?
It's a long time coming. I've wanted to do a book on Jack for a long, long time. And I don't know, things just sort of fall into place sometimes, and I say this is the time to do this book. But my whole thing is always like, if there's a lot of books already on a certain subject, and there's a lot of books on Jack, I'll admit it,
Sure.
it's me trying to find a new way to do it, or, a new approach to it. Fortunately, I have a lot of friends, and many of them are very good writers. So that worked out well. And then there's this guy.
Say
I,
So,
something.
I work cheap.
but you
I,
bring a little class to the production, don't you?
I like to think so, but I think you're just like sucking up to me. But that's cool. That's cool.
The cool thing is that the moment I started asking people, like, do you want to write about Jack Kirby? Everybody was like,
oh,
yes.
sure.
Everybody was on board. And that's really cool, because when you get to a point where you think maybe everything has been said about Jack that could be said or needed to be said, people prove you wrong. And that's, I think, the beauty of this book, is that it's not just me talking. It's literally 28 different essays, and we cover nearly every single series that Jack was involved with, from 61 up to 78, 79, roughly. So that's everything that he did for Marvel and DC in those phases, those three phases.
Was there any reason why you started with the Marvel Age and didn't do any of his stuff from the 40s and 50s?
Yeah, because it would have been like a phone book. Yeah, I mean, literally that. I mean, for me, I have to have parameters,
Sure.
and literally, yeah, we could have gone back to that. And you know what? If this book does really well, maybe that's what the sequel is literally do his golden age, and sort of, well, pre-Silver Age, or whatever in
Yeah.
their work, which would be really, really fun. And the other thing is that it's my wheelhouse too. I have to admit, like, a lot of the Atlas stuff, I'm just not that up on, and haven't really been able to read a lot of that. Golden Age, maybe a little bit more, but no, this is literally, I wanted to start with the greatness that is the Marvel universe, and then go from there. But I'll admit it, I was really looking forward to all of the stuff that he did at DC, and have everybody talk about that, because maybe that's a little more controversial.
Sure.
To me, Jack's time at DC always seems to be one of disappointment. For him, like, I don't know how the guy got through,
Well,
some of his stuff.
I think my my feeling has been that uh, they were more interested in acquiring Kirby, getting him away from Marvel, than they were of anything that he could do for them. It
Yeah.
was really, this was just a screw you to Marvel more than it was a win for DC. I mean, fans, we knew it was a win,
Mhm.
Although I got to admit, New Gods came out at the same time as the first issue of the fanzine that Paul Levitz and I published in February of '71, and I reviewed New Gods #1, and I was like, yeah, not so much.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Sure.
Ah.
yeah,
What
but
do you think was missing, Paul, from New Gods that we weren't getting, or that you weren't getting there from his Marvel work?
well, I think, keep in mind I was 15 and a half years old when I
Yeah,
wrote these
sure.
things, and my critical abilities were, not the best. But I think, I was just reacting to the newness of it. Everything he had done before, there was a history. There was a history to the FF and Avengers and Challenges of the Unknown, or whatever it was. There was a history there. This stuff was just like, what the hell is this? I don't
Interesting.
quite get it.
Mm.
I mean, eventually, of course, I came around. You got to, um, even if it wasn't the greatest stories ever told, man, you got to give him props for pulling that all together, for taking
Yeah.
that, those four books, and turning it into such a cohesive storyline.
Yeah.
Jim,
I,
do we know why and the reasons why he left Marvel? And I know Carmine, obviously, like Paul said, I mean, yeah, screw Marvel, and hey, obviously you're welcome here. But do we know the backstory of why he left Marvel?
I mean, it seems to me that it was just one too many times of of him not getting the credit he deserved. An abrasive, situation with Stan, which is really, really sad to me. We don't want to think of these guys like that, but he was working for a living, and you know, Jack always seem to me to be a fairly humble guy. Yes, not like Stan, but I love Stan, so I'm not gonna, dump on him. But I think he probably had an ego just as much as anybody else did, and wanted to see what he could do when juggling all the balls and not just the art. He wanted to draw his own scripts,
Yeah, and I don't think that he like I wrote about Spirit World and in the days of the mob, and the original plans for those magazines was that Jack would edit them. He wasn't looking to write and draw them. I think maybe with the New God stuff, his idea was to set this stuff up and turn it over to other people
Interesting.
without him having to do all the work.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was a humble
That's
guy.
a fascinating thing that he wanted to kind of segue into that role
Yeah,
and not necessarily be doing everything, although he did end up pretty much doing, everything. But yeah, I go back to that thing about disappointment. He was disappointed with what was going on in Marvel, and he goes off, with all good intentions, and kind of what, as Paul said, became a little bit of a pawn, in DC's, urge to, stick it to Marvel for being successful.
it was to catch up with Marvel. They were at this point in time they were for a decade they didn't pay attention to Marvel. They thought the stuff was ugly and the production was bad, and they thought, and then suddenly, somebody woke up and went, "Oh crap, why is this stuff selling?" And the answer to a large part was, Jack and well, Ditko was already long gone, but still, you know, that was what they saw. So like, we'll get him. That will hurt them. It may benefit us, but hurting them benefits us. Carmine, I love Carmine. I worked with him a lot. I knew him personally, but he was a crusty son of a bitch. And I think he would put a knife in your back as soon as look at you.
Also, when you compare the books that were coming out from DC and Marvel in that very late '60s, pre-Bronze Age, and the delineation, everybody, for the Bronze Age is, and if you guys have a different version, by all means, but it seemed like Barry Windsor Smith's Conan, that and I want to say 72 or 73, but you look at those last 12-cent and early 15-cent DC issues before guys like Kirby and some of the new guard took over, it was getting tired. You could tell they were still. It was a hangover from the Silver Age. It seemed.
Yeah, the Superman title, particularly, the stories just kept getting more and more ridiculous. I mean, I loved the character to death, but reading those silly stories, those cover images that they came up with to kind of draw you in, they were ridiculous. Marvel was doing the whole tearing down buildings, and Superman was going, the invisible people are stealing me, taking me to my doom, but I don't dare defy them. Defy them, Superman. But stuff like that. And again, there was a certain period where that silly stuff worked. That era of the Flash, in the 120s and 30s and 40s. Those covers were, even I feel like I'm turning into a puppet.
Mm-hmm.
What kid wouldn't grab that?
Sure.
Yeah.
The giant brain and the giant head, or Mirror Master in the Hall of Mirrors, and
maybe the Bronze Age truly began when the audience truly grew up.
Well, I think the Bronze Age may have come around mid 70s, ended around
a little later.
70s.
Yeah.
I mean,
end of the Comics Code.
Right.
Stan bumps up to the top office thing. I mean, those are all kind of things. The fans become the professionals.
Sure.
Yes.
Right at that time too.
Including Paul.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, the guy started coming in the 60s. You had some Bridwell and Roy Thomas, and then
Denny.
Denny O'Neil and a few other guys
Sure.
started coming in, and then come about 72, 73, it just exploded. There were all us punk kids, giving up our fanzines and showing up in DC.
I love that the era of punk kids.
I'm making sure that's not my phone dinging.
No, that's
It's
mine.
not mine.
Oh, no worries, man. All right, that's all right. Don't worry, it's all good. Um, I am curious though, Paul, and beyond your essay as well. We've discussed it before, but for the purposes of this discussion, tell me what it was like scripting one of Kirby's last works, and that's DC Superpowers, based on the toys, essentially a Justice League versus Darkseid kind of story, and
Right.
all the evil new gods. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, it frankly was pretty much a gig. This was 86. I did the second one, which was 86, and that was I was doing a lot of stuff like that. Just picking up assignments. And frankly, at the time I got the assignment, I don't think it was settled that Jack would be drawing the mini. I mean, had I known that, I don't know if I would have done anything different. I mean, I wrote this full script. And so I just wrote my script, and then suddenly I walk into Andy Helfer's office, and there's Jack Kirby pages on his desk with my art descriptions worked out. So yeah, it was great. I mean, I I loved and admired Kirby. There was stuff I grew up on his stuff. Challenges of the Unknown was one of my favorite teams, especially his stuff with that Wally Wood inking.
Oh yeah.
Jeez. So I was a big fan of that stuff, and even though it was his last regular monthly comic, and the chops weren't what they used to be. Got to share credit boxes with Jack Kirby, and that's not everybody got to do that. So I'm thrilled. It's one of those things that people had, well, what did you do in comics? Jack Kirby drew my comic books.
Yeah, that doesn't suck. Jim,
It
do you
looks good on
remember?
the resume,
Yes.
Jim,
Not that
do
it
you
helps.
do you remember that mid '80s period? Because I remember too. I was all over the fan magazines like Amazing Heroes and Comics Journal and the like, and they were pretty
Yeah.
rough on Jack on Hunger Dogs, his last Fourth World thing.
Yeah.
What was your perception of Because I always cut these guys, even back as a kid. I'm like, hey, if you're 50 years old, try and run a 50-yard dash against your 20-year-old self. I mean, I know some podcasters that were kind of lousy with Paul Galassi and comparing modern Paul Galassi to Masters of Kung Fu stuff, and it's like that's not fair, man. It really isn't.
No, it's not. Jack was never diminished in my view, but I will also admit, there a lot of these legends became parodies of themselves in some ways, and their art. It happened with Ditko,
Sure,
and sometimes it is hard to look at. Sometimes it's just that maybe he needed a better inker.
sure.
I mean, there is that, but at the end of the day, it's still Jack Kirby. The guy still wanted to work, and why not? But yeah, I mean, there were times where it was hard to look at, but I would have mixed it up with anybody who was going to criticize him because you just don't do that.
And,
I
and I and I think and I don't think the energy of his art ever diminished. I mean, some of the
oh
draftsmanship may have
no,
been,
absolutely, yeah.
but the power and the energy of that stuff just never went away. And that was 80% of Kirby to begin with. He was not a great artist. He was a dynamic, powerful storyteller.
Hmm.
Agreed. Is it Ed Cato, Jim, in your book that goes into
Yes,
kind of the
yeah.
dynamism
He
of
he's
Jack's
another
art?
person that I'm contractually obligated to use for all my nonfiction books. Yeah, no, I love Ed's work. He always delivers something unique in the way he sets things up, and he wanted Tales of Suspense, and then which went into the first Captain America series at Marvel. So pretty much everybody got exactly what they wanted, and this guy here, forever the troublemaker, he has to come to me and say, well, what about those magazines? What about Spirit World and In the Days of the Mob? And I was like, well, I don't know. But listen, if Paul Kupperberg tells you he wants to do a particular something, you let him do it. And
Finally,
Excellent.
somebody.
No, that's great, Paul. We're happy
I don't
that
argue.
happened.
I don't argue with him. If he wanted to do that, that was fine. That was
I
fine.
think there were significant books. I don't know if you read the piece, but I actually was I was very curious. I always been curious why they weren't published under the DC imprint.
Yeah.
It used a Stanley Indicia. It was Hampton House, instead of DC Comics. And I always wondered what was up with that, and I never thought to really dig into it. And fortunately, I know a former president of DC Comics, so I got in touch with him and said, "What's the deal? Why did they do that?" I thought it was kind of a legal thing to indemnify themselves against whatever, I don't know. And Paul's response was, "No, this is Warner Brothers. They have lawyers. They probably, this is probably a business thing. It has to do with the retail, allowance and this and that and the other thing." And there was they weren't trying to hide anything. They were just trying to get the magazine in circulation at the best rate. Although, as it turns out, because it was a new magazine in a format that was unusual for comics, most of them never got out of the warehouse.
Wow.
So the thing got very badly, very poor distribution.
That was eye-opening for me, and I'm so glad Paul tackled this one, because I think just like a lot of things, especially in the DC stuff with Kirby, there's some fallacies out there, some misperceptions and misconceptions, and to me that was really something to learn. Like, these things never, or they barely got out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a shame.
Yeah.
What a
Much
shame.
much like
How
Gil
could that
Kane's.
story have been different if they had really gotten circulation?
But
No, it's
and the cancellation wasn't due to. I mean, they had no numbers. They couldn't possibly have any numbers. But the cancellation was most likely due to a change of corporate leadership.
okay. So yeah, was that when Kinney, was it Kinney that bought National?
No,
And
Kinney had already owned it since the '60s.
oh, excuse me. Well, yeah, Warner, because I suppose.
Yeah, this was I forget the Warner executive that
Okay.
Paul
Okay.
mentioned. But yeah, he said it's probably that this guy took over, and because this other guy was probably in charge when the magazines were okayed, because there's a page by Sergio in them, and this guy was friend to Sergio's. So,
Aragonis. When you say Sergio Aragonis. Okay.
Yeah. So, it was likely this guy took over and went, "Why are we doing this? Cancel it." So,
Wow.
it had nothing to do with Jack. It just had to do with the corporate environment and the people in charge.
It is interesting though, because this was the time of Cadence playing with Marvel black and white magazines and the horror stuff. And
that was still a couple. Warren was out there, but Marvel was still about 2 or 3 years away from their black and white line.
I appreciate the correction. That's fantastic. Guys, honestly, this is Jim. This is why I'm glad you do your books. Paul, this is why I'm glad you do your books as well. Because as you said earlier, Jim, there are a lot of misconceptions of what went down. And it's a bad game of telephone of, well, I always heard X. And suddenly X becomes the story. And certainly AI is no help to that either, because a lot of misinformation is being added to the information collective. And the good information is getting dumbed down.
I must say, the ignorance of the people outside of comics about what goes on and what went on inside of comics is staggering.
Yeah.
Everybody has a theory, and the answer is usually, I mean, it's Occam's razor, it's usually the simplest answer. It's like, no, this guy had a bad day, so he canceled the book.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
There wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't. And so,
yeah, and that's not very fun. That's not a very sexy explanation.
I know. And believe me, I told plenty of lies. So,
but we need guys like you, Paul, who were there. And I'm glad you talked to Levitz about Spirit World and In the Days of the Mob, because they were kind of the odd ducks of that period, and so little was known about them. I'm really glad that Warner's decided to re-release them a couple years ago and
Yeah,
make new
yeah,
hardcovers
the
of them.
hardcover, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
hoping that when people pick up Jack of all comics and they start looking at what is included, and they're going to get to Paul's essay and they're going to be pleasantly surprised, that it's in there, and they're going to say, "Wow, so they covered that too."
Another wrinkle of Kirby's work that doesn't get the credit that it should is the 2001 Space Odyssey book,
yeah,
both the Treasury edition and the monthly comic.
Oh my God,
That's
such a
where we got,
favorite of mine.
yeah, that's where we got Machine Man. And
Yep.
I mean, all the cosmic stuff that Kirby laid out in FF and with Galactus and the Silver Surfer and the like,
Yeah.
man, suddenly it seemed like the filter was off and he really went to town and really went beyond the movie and
It
gave us
it
some
still
really trippy
surprises me
ideas.
to this day that he wanted to do an adaptation, of 2001. It spoke to him in some ways, and pardon the pun, I treasure that Treasury edition. I was so lucky that my dad bought that to me. And you know what? At that point, I had not seen the movie. So my
Wow.
first exposure to that story was through the filtered through the brain of Jack Kirby, and then my dad got me the whole series after that. And there's the story where it's the guy who he watches superhero videos. They're like three-dimensional things or whatever. Oh my God, I don't know exactly why. I haven't analyzed it, but I love that story. There's some really good stuff in there. It's a shame because if I'm not mistaken, it has never been reprinted because of the rights,
yeah. It's
I would
probably
assume. Yeah, boy, if people can track that down, it's some really, really, really interesting stuff, when you put it through Jack and get what you get.
The return of Kirby to Marvel with the Captain America bicentennial days or moments. I had that Treasury edition back then,
Oh,
and
that
oh
was
yeah, talk about it, Jim.
yeah, no, I you know what it was? It was like having Jack, in this size of book, and then to get him that big and new stuff was mind-boggling at that time. I still love that whole, story too, and will return to it, every once in a while. But just that stuff, man, just smacks you right in the face. So big and huge and looming.
Captain America time traveling,
yeah,
and hitting all these different periods of not only American history, history in general. Suddenly
Yeah.
he's back in World War II. Suddenly he's in Revolutionary Days. I
Hmm.
loved my favorite moment, and it's funny because it's echoed in that Captain America First Avenger movie, is when he finds himself kind of in the middle of a Busby Berkeley kind of
Yeah,
Hollywood
yeah.
musical. And just there, and then also just that great Kirby moment of him freaking out, and going, "What the hell's going on? Why am I here? I was never
Well,
here for this."
speaking of Barry Smith, if
Hmm.
am I correct? If am I remembering this correctly? He inked part of that story. Isn't he? There's some really interesting inking in that, and it's not all the same guy that's inking it. I really feel because I remember that was a revelation to see like a different kind of inking over, and I'm pretty sure it's Barry Smith.
could be. There was. I remember earlier there was Bill Everett inked him on Thor,
Hmm.
and
Oh
that is my
wow,
absolute favorite of all time Kirby inking. There was several issues of Thor that inked by Bill Everett.
Hmm.
crazy! Yeah, I
Awesome
didn't,
stuff.
because
Oh,
again, we usually think of
Vinny.
the
Yeah,
you know the well Coletta certainly, yes, and he's kind of notorious for the Thor work that he did, but
Kind
also
Hey,
some
of,
of the
kind
listen,
of.
wait. Hold on. Fuck all the Coletta haters. Okay, Vinny got the books out. I know he didn't, but Vinny could do good work, and when he had
Mhm.
time, he
Yeah,
did good
yeah.
work.
I agree.
Like Vinny, I was there one day on staff in 1976, 77. An issue of Warlord came in that needed to literally be done or inked overnight. So
Mhm.
they gave it to Vinny. Vinny walked around, said, you. And if you could hold a brush or a Pentel, he put you to work. I was filling in blacks on an issue of Warlord until like 1 in the morning. But the goddamn book made shipping, saved DC Comics $10,000 in fines. And if the fans don't like it, well, hey, sorry, this is a monthly business. You have to get one out every month, and you need guys like Vinny. So yeah, I don't abide any Vinny hating. I think
Okay.
Well, yeah, honestly, I felt the same way for a long time and still do. There's a few wrinkles about Vinny. For instance, I had Dennis Cowan on, and Dennis told me he wasn't the nicest guy in the world,
Vinny
and
was a flip.
you know, well, and even in kind of a shitty racial way, unfortunately.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah. No, well, Vinny was a Jersey Italian guy. I mean, he lived in a Sopranos house, but he had a bunch of people from Marvel over one day, and one of the guys was taking pictures. I mean, Vinny didn't want any pictures because he didn't want anybody to know how well he lived.
Wow.
oh,
And then there was another case. Um, he brought us all to a fried chicken place on, like, I don't know, 10th, 11th Avenue in the city, in Midtown. And he said, "This is my fried chicken place, anything you guys want." So he
Hmm.
treated us to fried chicken. And, we're all looking at each other going, yeah, this is probably a front. But hey, free fried chicken.
Sure, why not? Of
We're good.
course.
So yeah, Vinny was not a nice guy. Um, my most of my interaction with him was passing in the hall and him going, and
Sure.
yeah, that was it. But he thought I was running in the fourth in Santa Anita. So who knows?
Well,
Paul,
again,
Paul, did you ever actually meet Jack
I
face
was
to
going to ask
face?
you both that. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I met
Okay.
Jack a couple of times. Most of them were in passing. There was, I forget what year it was. There was in San Diego a big birthday party for Jack one year in
Hmm.
the '80s, and that was where I finally got to, stand there and talk to him. But every time I tried to say anything like, "Wow, you're Jack Kirby, you're great," he'd go, "No, no, no, it's you guys, it's you kids, you're doing the great stuff. I'm
Hmm.
just an old."
That's
He would
Hmm.
cool.
not talk about humble. He would not let you compliment him.
The great Kirby inkers that we think of, though, are like Joe Sinnott, of course, and
Yeah.
uh,
Royer.
Mike Royer. Absolutely had the man. I is Mike still with us?
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
Mike's doing
You know,
convention.
oh
Yeah.
man, honestly, Paul or Jim, if you guys know how to get in touch with Mike, I
I
met
think
him.
he's on like Facebook and
I got to
whatever.
find
He's
him
on social media.
because I know beyond also inking the pages. I know he was very instrumental in the Marvel superheroes cartoon,
Sure.
getting that art and everything, getting that Kirby art, frankly,
Hmm.
and everyone shits on the limited animation and stuff, but it's like these are Jack Kirby images come to life. I
Yeah.
love them. I love
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
cartoons.
I love them too. Yeah. I mean, so what? You're getting Kirby stuff that moves a little bit.
Exactly. Cap's eyes are blinking. Or one arm. No, it was great stuff, man. That's fantastic. Again, give the number of essays that are in this book, Jim.
28.
28 fantastic essays,
Yeah.
everybody. And
Yeah.
also hitting a lot of, there's the obvious, and I don't mean this in the pejorative way, there's the obvious Kirby's greatest hit stuff, but no, like truly, Spirit Folk and In the Days of the Mob, Paul's thing. Manhunter, look at that, man,
Yeah.
fantastic, exactly. And I love that whole series, Jim, of first issue specials.
This
And
this is the book that did it for me up until this point, and I didn't figure this out until I did the essay on first issue special. I didn't figure it out until I was writing that, researching it, writing or whatever, that was the first new Kirby that I saw. Up until that point, it had all been reprints,
okay,
in a Treasury edition or like a giant size FF or, something like that, in an annual or something like that. I didn't get the Fourth World stuff. My dad wasn't buying it for me. My dad bought me stuff that, and I figured this out later on. My dad was buying me stuff that maybe he recognized. I mean, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, he recognized.
sure.
He didn't get me very many Marvels, and I think he instinctively felt that they were like of a different cut.
Well, how old were you at the
They were a
time?
little more dangerous,
How old were you at the
in a
time?
way. I'm sorry.
How old were you at the time?
Well, I was born in 65, so when I got this, I had just turned 10 years old.
Okay, so yeah, Marvel was still, you know, 1975. Marvel was probably still a bit much for 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
But I
So,
don't, you know, but when I started reading comics, Marvel didn't even exist.
hmm,
So, you know, by the time they came along, I was already so, you know, deeply entrenched in the DC universe that, you know, there was no, and then of course, you know, Flash 123, the Flash of Two Worlds, where Flash crosses to Earth 2 and finds out that this multiverse took place on my birthday. So when I read that as a 10-year-old in 65, it was like, well, I'm hooked for life. Yeah,
I saw your Facebook post about that, Paul.
yeah,
That was fantastic,
yeah.
and I can appreciate that. Well, Jim, you and I are basically the same age, and my first exposure to Kirby in general were those Marvel Treasury editions. And
mhm,
really, that was my first Marvel because I was a DC kid, because, just like you, because of my parents
yeah,
loving Batman, Superman, the like.
yeah,
And it was that coming of Galactus story in that Marvel Treasury edition.
yep,
And oh
yep,
my god! And again, to see it oversized like that,
yep.
and that's why I'm excited for the movie. And here's a real chance. No disrespect to that first movie, that I think is okay with Jessica Alba and the like, and Chris Evans and everybody. But you know, they kind of chickened out on Galactus making him a cloud. But I am very
I think
excited
they
that we
ran
will
out of money
see.
more likely.
What's that? They ran
I
out of
think they
money.
ran out of money more likely.
Probably. But no, this is exciting, and it's like, all right, now we're getting some real likely Kirby designs, other than the popcorn bucket. I haven't seen if they've shown images of Galactus already, other than his foot, of course, in the trailer.
My my first exposure to a fourth world character was actually in Brave and Bold.
Yeah.
So the first time I saw Mr. Miracle, he was being drawn by Jim Aparo, which isn't bad because I'm a
But a
huge
very
Jim
different
Aparo
time.
fan. I think I first saw the demon in a house ad for again Brave and Bold, and it was the issue before the one where I started. I started with Batman Wildcat,
Me
and I
too.
remember seeing that little thing of the demon and whatever that like Gotham Bay be my grave or whatever it was, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so creepy. And let the demon, like that sounds like a Marvel thing more than anything. But that's how I got though, and then what New Gods was I think New Gods what was there a first issue special maybe with New Gods, not Kirby, but whoever.
Later on, there
No,
was
I know what it was. They actually came back and added some issues to Kirby's run, but it was by other people.
Jerry. I
Oh,
think it was
okay.
Way
I
and
had an
Rudy.
issue of that. So I mean, my DC Kirby education was really wonky, but what a way to come into it because this thing has stuck with me for so long now. And the first issue of Sandman with the Wordblinks,
And
the
that's what I was going to say, because that's what I
ever.
remember. Because not only was it Kirby, but it was Simon and Kirby together
Yeah,
again
yeah.
for
And I
that
didn't,
first issue
I didn't
special.
get the significance of it back then. And
Yeah.
now I do, and it really was significant.
No, that's great, man. And again, no, I really find Kirby's whole DC period very interesting. And, you know, and I'm glad that a lot of these characters have endured and others have wanted a crack at it. And in fact, right now, I think the New Gods new series that Ram V is writing, and forgive me, everybody, I forget who's drawing it, but it's gorgeous and it's really interesting. And when Starlin was doing the New Gods, and when Walt Simonson was doing uh, the Orion book, right?
The
Wasn't he
Orion
doing the
book, yeah.
Orion book?
After Burns' run, Walter
Of
came in.
course. Yep.
It's nice to see that, they're
Oh, I
being
was
kept
editor on it.
alive because those characters have always sort of been to me always a bridesmaid, never a bride. It's like they were doomed to be guest characters and never be headliners themselves. So it's nice to see, look at trying to think of who did Eternals. It's been several years now.
Oh well.
Was
From
it
a
Neil
writing
Gaiman?
standpoint, it was Neil Gaiman was writing it. I know
Yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah.
Ramita,
That,
I think Johnny was doing a bit of Eternals, or at least did
yeah,
covers.
yeah. So something that for a long time had been considered more or less. a failure or a flop,
Sure.
and now, and then you get these like huge, headline creators who want a piece of it. And that's really something. So hopefully Jack is smiling somewhere.
Yeah, well, even when Busick was doing for, I think it was Dynamite, when they were doing some of the later independent Kirby creations, Silver
Mhm.
Star and things like that. And I,
You know,
you know,
and especially if that was Jack's intention, was to start these things off and give it over to other people. So it came true. It just kind of happened later than sooner.
do you know, Paul? Was it always like part of the deal that beyond him drawing and stuff, that he would be given some sort of editorial capacity?
Well, he was editor of his books of his own titles, so he
Oh,
had.
okay.
And I guess as editor, you're allowed to hire people. But I'm just taken off from the days of the mob and Spirit World stuff, where his idea was to do a full color magazine with legitimate writers. I mentioned Truman Capote and Norman Mailer writing about this stuff and having other people illustrate it. So I'm just kind of tripping off of that.
Sure.
You can't. He was coming up with so much stuff. There's no possible way he could have done it all himself. I
Sure.
mean, it was amazing. Those the New Gods, the first run of the New Gods books, where they were bi-monthly, I believe. So, he was able to handle the 4 things a month. But, that's a lot of work, even for Jack Kirby.
Mhm.
Absolutely. The also comparing, and you've got essays, Jim, in the book for both Sergeant Fury and also his war tales for DC in the 70s. And
Yeah.
I've really appreciated his DC World War II stuff, and I appreciated all of his war stuff. But yeah, that must have been fun to look at from an essay standpoint, comparing the two points of view on these two very different things.
The Sergeant Fury that almost didn't make it into the book. It wasn't in the original plan, and it was kind of late into, people handing in essays and everything where I said, you know what, I think I really need to have that in here, and found a writer who could, come in and do a good job, but do a quicker job too. But yeah, it seemed weird to have an essay about the losers in our fighting forces, but not have the Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos in there. So I'm really glad that, we were able to get that in there. And
I
again,
wonder
that's
if
another thing. Like it's not, this book doesn't just have his superhero work
right.
in it. It's got that stuff too. It doesn't have westerns in it
Okay.
though. Yeah, like from the Marvel era.
And he also did. They also did a. Simon and Kirby also did a lot of war stuff. In the 50s for
Absolutely.
I forget the name of their companies, but
Chester
Crestwood.
Chesterfield or
Crestwood.
Crestwood. That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Excuse
what,
me.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
And
he was always playing in genres. I mean, from the very start.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think he probably felt kind of hamstrung by having to focus on superheroes so much in those days, because look back, there's everything from the early days. I mean, geez, Simon and Kirby created the romance genre in
Yeah.
comics.
And
Absolutely.
he tried to do romance with Soul Love, and
So
that didn't
Right.
happen,
Soul Love, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's some gorgeous stuff.
Yeah.
Tomorrows has well, not reprinted, finally published, what there
yeah,
is of that. They have that Dingbat Love compilation,
yeah,
which really is if you're a Kirby fan, you really need to have that. And that Soul Love stuff, even in pencil form, just really looked great. It's a shame that didn't make it, but
yeah.
he tried,
He he also
he tried to
adapted
go
the
back to the romance genre.
the Prisoner
Yes,
TV
Yeah.
show, and it never occurred to me until I saw pages in Tomorrow's how
Uh-huh.
much Patrick McGowan's face looks like a Jack
Oh,
Kirby face.
yeah, no, he's totally, it's like, he's designed by Kirby. Absolutely.
It's
John,
insane.
I'm so glad
yeah.
you said that because I have always thought
Yeah,
that.
and
I'm a
and
big
also
Patrick McGowan fan.
and Jim, especially again, because we're about the same age. I always felt if they were going to redo The Prisoner, that the rock artist Robert Palmer because he also had kind of a Kirby face as well, and
Oh,
had those
yeah,
penetrating eyes.
that's pretty good. Yeah, I'm amused by that. That's pretty funny. Yeah,
Well,
boy, I'd almost forgotten about the prisoner thing. And then Gil Kane like tried to do it too.
yep,
Look, Kirby
yep.
couldn't do it. Gil Kane couldn't do it.
Well, yeah, I don't know what happened, maybe licensing or whatever, or lack of
Yeah,
interest.
I
I don't
mean,
know.
it could have been that, but or maybe it's just a property that just cannot be adapted
Well,
into.
they've tried. They have tried many times over the years.
Yeah,
Yeah, even
yeah,
great
yeah,
writers like Peter Milligan even have taken a crack at it and stuff.
yeah.
I actually like Dean Motter's '80s
Did you?
Prisoner
I
sequel.
I
I did.
wasn't happy with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't happy with it. And then this real recent thing too. I wasn't happy with that either. Yeah, I would have much been happier with Jack's having Jack's book come out.
Well,
Not
absolutely, man.
everything needs to be a comic.
Say it
I
again,
said
Paul.
not everything needs to be. I said not everything needs to be a comic book. You know?
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Sure.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. That's true. I wondered if Kirby's Sergeant Fury War stuff, and I know Dick Ayers did the majority of it, but I wonder if it was as appreciated by the adult audience the way that the DC War books were. Because based on the letter pages, it seemed like we were getting an older clientele writing in and enjoying the Losers and Sergeant Rock and the like.
I
Hmm.
had an uncle in the military who was 10 years older than me, and he was, he was aware of Sergeant Fury, but Sergeant Rock. I mean, Sergeant Rock was like, that's what happens. Sergeant Fury is a superhero comic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it
Hmm.
was, and it was being played to adolescents.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. So
Hmm.
no, I get that. I can appreciate all that. Um,
Brian K. Morris, who does the Our Fighting Forces, the Losers essay, he does touch upon reactions in the letters pages. So that was another nice thing that, when I opened up that essay and started reading it to discover that he wanted to talk about how people were talking about that book. And if I remember correctly, he was saying there was a lot of people who weren't happy with it because Kirby pretty much ditched everything. Like he kept character names for the most part, and but that was Jack, he did it his way.
well, and it just felt like, given the fact that he was an infantryman,
Yeah,
experiencing the front line like that and stuff, that it
yeah,
really was kind of, I was there, and this is
yeah.
my account. So I can appreciate both sides of that argument. Also, I don't know if you guys have seen it yet. I noticed on Tubi. I'm a big proponent of Tubi because it's a
Yeah.
free streamer. And that French documentary, Kirby Goes to War, is on
Oh,
there with an
Mm.
English narration. There are subtitles for specific parts of it, but the overall narration is in English. And
oh, mon Dieu.
yeah,
I'll
pretty
have
Wow.
to
neat.
look
Oh,
that one up. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah,
Paul, were you ever treated to one of Jack's war stories?
no,
Oh, okay. I
no.
thought everybody was.
No, again, I never really spent enough time with him. It was more in
Yeah,
passing, in
yeah.
social events at conventions. The whole time we were doing superpowers, I never,
Hmm.
never had any contact with him.
yeah,
Did
that's
you
Uh,
too
meet
bad, man. That you
did
you
you
yeah,
meet
sent in your
Roz?
scripts and it came back, obviously.
yeah.
Did you meet Roz?
I think I met Roz at the birthday party at San
Okay,
Diego. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Had you ever met him, Jim?
No, no. Sadly, I didn't really get to go to a comic book convention until I was an adult. Jack passed away in what, the early
94,
90s, 94.
I think.
Yeah. I may not have actually gone to, and then nothing on the West Coast. So no. The closest I ever had a brush with him was at one point. um it was like Blue Rose Press did the art of Jack Kirby, the really nice book. And I worked for Walden Books at the time, and I had actually wrote to the publisher, who was a good friend of Kirby's, and told him that I was trying to get that book into Walden Books, and he sent me a copy of it. And inside was a really nice letter from him, and he said, "I spoke to the Kirbys about your idea about getting, into Walden Books, and that was they were really thrilled to hear that." So literally, I mean, I remember I glowed, for weeks after that. That was my 1 degree or whatever separation, but that's the closest I ever came to him. I don't know what I would do. I don't know, I doubt if I would have been able to speak at all having met Jack. And all those wonderful stories about people who showed up at their homes and were, given lunch and stuff like that, I mean, it makes you burn with jealousy,
I hear you, man. No, I haven't had him on the show to talk about it, but Mark Evanier and he was one of those kids back in the day, and then ended up working for Jack, which is pretty
Yep.
cool.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Mark is like the Kirby ambassador,
Keeper of the Kirby.
Say it again.
I said the keeper of the Kirby.
Indeed.
There you
Indeed.
go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your
The
table of
keeper of
contents.
the crackle.
Keeper of the Crackle, absolutely. I'm looking at your table of contents here, man. You got another guy, Tom Brevoort, of course, who always has wonderful things to say about both companies. I'm always thrilled with not only with his Marvel memories, but his DC memories as
Yeah,
well.
it's amazing that I have a current Marvel editor, and he's been in a couple of my books so far.
That's terrific. And then also, again, like these odd duck things that, yes, and now maybe more so because of some of the adaptations,
Yeah.
but like Josh Reynolds wrote an essay about Devil Dinosaur.
Devil Dinosaur. Yeah. One of the other ones that I want to point out is that Frank Schildner did the very short-lived Cobra stuff. The one
Right.
or Kirby did a couple of issues of
Kirby did.
Justice Incorporated.
Oh, which
Yeah, yeah, he did. He did a couple issues of Justice Incorporated.
Yeah,
okay.
and then
Yes.
one issue of Richard Dragon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think he did Richard Dragon, did he?
Yep, one.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
Justice Incorporated, that's the pulp character, everybody, the
Yeah, the
Avenger,
Avenger.
Yeah.
who was contemporary with Doc Savage and the Shadow, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
but
we
Cobra,
covered just about everything.
Cobra, one issue, right?
Yeah, and he didn't even finish it. It was Marty Pasco was brought in to write it, and I think it was Pablo Marcus finished the art.
If I remember correctly, I think that they took what Jack had done and like kind of repasted, recut it, and
Oh,
did,
interesting.
kind of fiddled with it a lot. But yeah, he does that. He does that first. But as far as how many issues it was just a few.
6 or 7, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Well, yeah, I got caught in the DC implosion of the late 70s.
Yeah.
And Mike Hesser was drawing it eventually.
Wow. Yeah, I remember talking about Cobra with our dear friend Marty, who we all miss, obviously. Still gets me angry that he's not with us anymore. In fact, I was going over one of his old interviews of mine, and I was telling Paul off the air, I started an e-magazine for Word Balloon for my patrons, and I'm going to definitely transcribe that interview with Marty, because he was just a font of so much history, and much in the same way that Paul is and everything. And thank God you guys are,
Yeah, I love Marty. We were friends since 1971, I think, and I was the only person who could make him laugh by saying anything. So I would walk up to him and go, "Wankel rotary engine." And Marty would literally collapse on the floor laughing.
He was your Jack Benny.
But was he really pesky?
No, he was a sweetheart.
Okay.
When I was, he was also a mentor. He wasn't much older than me, but he got into the business 2 or 3 years before I did, and at a skill level of about 8 years ahead of me.
Wow.
No, he was really, look at his early stuff. He was that good. And he would hire me to help him. My name shows up in a few things. I think an issue of the Joker, as plotting assist or something. I do breakdowns, and he would kind of go over my stuff and go, no, you want to do it this way because of that, this or that. He was kind of, he hired me to do the job, and then he gave me a class on how to make it better. So so there was that, and we were very close friends. Our families were tight. Our kids grew up together. I saw Judith, his wife, at my son's wedding last month. So.
Oh wow, that's great, man.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, back to Kirby. Another great book, although Man, they sure didn't treat him right, did they? Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. On the one hand, a lot of writing, obviously, and drawing, but a little issue with the image of Superman with Kirby, right, guys?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Charles Rutledge covers that in his essay. He takes an interesting approach to it that we don't like it today, or maybe they didn't like it then, but that as far as a business decision, he could almost
Well,
understand.
yeah. Explain the decision though for those who don't
Yeah.
know.
Paul, do you want to take that one?
yeah, it was Jack drew issues of Jimmy Olsen, and he gave Superman a Jack Kirby Superman face, and they were not happy that it's Jack Kirby, so a Jack Kirby face on a Jack Kirby character. We know it's Superman. He's got the S on his chest, and the curl. But they didn't like the way he drew the face, so instead of having him fix it or change anything, they just had patches made. Was it Kurt or Schafferberg?
Murphy
It was
Anderson.
Murphy. That's right. It was Murphy.
And Al Plastino.
And
Oh,
Al
I didn't know about Plastino. Wow,
Yeah, yeah,
makes
both,
sense.
both of them. In fact, Al might have done even more than
Okay.
Murphy.
That Murphy.
Yeah.
I'd have to go look again, but yeah. So they just pasted up these replacement faces on all the Superman figures.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I do understand this was kind of a first for them.
Sure.
This Superman was way, way farther off model than even Wayne Boring, and so I think it just made them nervous that people, readers were going, because again, they were still looking at their readers as, as 12-year-olds, as
Sure.
kids who don't want things to change.
Well, not only that, but the books were also competing with all the licensed toys and other images of Superman that were out there that very much were the house style. And
Sure.
so I can appreciate. I mean, no. Again, as an adult, I can understand the reasons why. But also, am I right on the reproductions? Didn't they bring them back to the Kirby heads in some cases when they were able to?
I don't remember.
Oh boy, that sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, there's pencils, photocopies of pencils, so that we could see all that. They did a series of Jack Kirby Fourth World action figures. There was two series of them, and there was a Superman in there, and the head was a Jack Kirby a very obvious Jack Kirby Superman. Jack's Jimmy Olsen work is my most favorite DC work of his. I just love what that and I'm the biggest Goody Rickles fan in the world. Those two issues are just bonkers, but bonkers in the very best way possible.
Absolutely.
Just love those those.
I don't have it handy to show you guys, but I had the pleasure of meeting Don Rickles a few times in the '90s, and I had a cover, and he's like, "Oh, you're one of these idiots." All right, great. Just totally like saying the right Don Rickles thing about it, and he laughed. He said, he goes, "That was the craziest thing that I was ever like associated with." He goes, "I wouldn't say involved." He said, "But it was just such a nice tribute," and he goes, "Yeah," he goes, "It was kind of nuts." He goes, "Was it popular?" And I'm like, we're still talking about it, man. 25 years later, of course it was popular. So,
well, legend has it that at the time he wasn't happy with it, or his people expressed, a distaste for it or whatever. But oh my God,
I heard he and Jack were neighbors in California, and that's how they knew each other.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's true, but that's
I don't. Yeah, he didn't. Rickles didn't mention that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
No, but I'm with you.
All that dialogue, all that stuff that he wrote for Goody Rickles and Don Rickles is just, I can.
Oh, it's
I can
hilarious.
probably cite most of those quotes.
But that's like the Jimmy
Get
Olsen.
yourself a bikini and go out and cause heart attacks, or whatever he says to Morgan Edge's secretary.
Sure. That was the great weird thing about the Jimmy Olsen books, because in the Silver Age, they were crazy enough, caveman beetles, and what's that, Paul?
Giant Turtle Jimmy and all that stuff.
Oh my God, all the different iterations of Porcupine Jimmy, Werewolf Jimmy, etc. But then, here comes Kirby, and it's very 70s. The check coat and the bow tie are gone. and he's very much. I mean, it's the transition. Was Paul, was he Mr. Action in the Kirby run, or was that Superman Family?
I think that was Superman Family a little later.
That was
Okay,
right, not long after that.
yeah,
I
but that's
think
the thing.
I was writing Jimmy and Superman Family in like '76 or so, and I think he may have been Mr. Action then. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Well, regardless, it started him on that path of being a more adult character
Yes.
and putting him with the Newsboy Legion and the Guardian and all the Fourth World stuff. I mean, that's, am I right, Paul? Isn't that where the introduction of the Fourth World
Oh,
began? Was
sure, I
in
think so.
Jimmy?
Yeah. He stopped being just an appendage to Superman. He stopped being, another Lois Lane to rescue.
Right.
Uh, he became a guy who was just off doing his own stuff.
But also all the different weird ideas
Sure.
that Jack put in there beyond it just being, the adventures of boy reporter Jimmy and everything.
Yeah. No, he took it. Uh, I don't think Jack had any filters, and I don't think he had any stoppers.
Good.
I think he just kept going until it was like, well, I got to stop here. I don't know what's happening, but I don't know. I just think he was willing to try anything, and I'm willing to bet that a lot of what he tried, he wasn't quite sure where it was going either. Because I know the Fourth World stuff, he didn't do an entire issue. He would do scenes, individual scenes, and then mix and match them and put it together to make the story when they were all done.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I kind of makes me nervous just thinking about doing that. Yeah. So, who knows if he even knew what was going on? It's just like, I guess, it happens to all of us. You're writing a story and you're going, hey, this is great. Don't know what the hell's going to happen, but, we'll know it when we get there.
Today they call that pantsing.
Yes.
You're
I'm
flying by the seat of your pants. There's plotters and pantsers.
I am a total pantser. Yeah.
I'm a plantser. I do a little of both.
Yeah.
I'm a podcast pantser. I guarantee you that with you boys. But that said, I also what I appreciated, and a great example of it was it the first issue of the New Gods where we had Orion and then we had the photograph of the moon behind Orion. I mean that kind of collage of using photographs in his art, I know started, or at least my first awareness was in the Galactus story in Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was. Does anyone in Jim? Do people that write the essays? Does anyone talk about that kind of collage style of photographs in art?
And it's not really gone into very much, but it's absolutely mentioned. I'm pretty sure that Cliff Biggers goes into it in his Fantastic Four essay, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the longest essay in the book because
100
obviously, a little over 100 issues.
Sure.
Of Fantastic Four with Jack, should have the longer essay. I'm always amazed that anybody let him do those collages. And as a kid, I didn't appreciate them. And now I appreciate the attempt. I appreciate that he was thinking out of the box and that he wasn't going to just limit himself to pencils and ink, that he wanted to work multimedia,
right?
It's
really mixed
amazing.
Media. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, and again, I mean that's the thing, so many of his ideas we're still catching up to him. I mean, also from a writing standpoint with 2001 and creating Machine Man,
Mm-hmm.
and really dealing with not only robotics and cyborgs, but when you think about it, artificial AI. And I mean, and here we are today wrestling with that very problem.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stuff. No, I'm with you, man. I don't mind. We can wrap, guys, but before we do, unfortunately, as we're recording this, we found out the sad news that one of the Marvel greats, the great Jim Shooter, not only Marvel, but of course Valiant and his other comic book endeavors over the years and stuff. But sadly, Jim Shooter passed away. So, thoughts, boys, about Mr. Shooter?
Well, I never worked with Jim. I've known him a long time. We used to play poker together in the early '70s at Levitz's apartment in the city. Used to see him at conventions. I know the stories, and like all I can go by is, how he was with me. And there was we were at a convention 2000. We were at a convention in Westchester, New York, and I was with my 4 or 5 year old son at the time, and he was in his stroller, and we're walking around, and he got something in his eye. So I rolled him into the men's room, and I'm trying to, and Jim came in and saw what was going on, and kind of got down on his knees and like distracted my kid.
Oh, that's
While,
nice.
and that was just sweet. I'm getting a little emotional
Sure.
because
Yeah.
it was a long trip for him to get down to his knees.
That's what I was thinking. He had to fold himself down.
It took an hour and a half, but he got it. No, it was just very sweet, and he was very good with Max, and and I never forgot that. And again, I never had anything but good interactions with him. I know I have friends and people I've worked with who had issues with him, but I can only go by myself. It's not like he's Donald Trump, and if you associate with him, you're immediately evil. It's just like, here's a guy who people have a very different opinion of, and it's okay.
Jim, any thoughts?
I don't think you can get much more polarizing of a figure in the industry than Jim Shooter. But I think my takeaway is at the end of the day, you have to look at what he accomplished and his work, and that era of him being editor-in-chief. And yeah, I know he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but he got results. He also was behind one of my most favorite comic book series of all time, and that's the original Star brand of the the New Universe books. But yeah, I mean, you can trace back so many different things to Jim Shooter. Like Kirby, he had a vision and he put it into motion, and he wasn't going to let anybody stand in his way of achieving that vision. And I think a lot of people who maybe have heard all the stories, if you said, when you were a kid or whatever, what was one of your most favorite eras of Marvel, and they may start citing those different things, and you could probably say, oh, well, guess what, Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief at that time.
Well, Jim was brought in to make the trains run on time, because the trains were off the freaking tracks. And you're not going to be popular by doing that.
Right.
You're going to make a lot of enemies, and he did. But he did the job. It's like Coletta. He did the job he was hired to do, and he did it. He got it done. And don't forget, here's a guy who became a professional comic book writer at 13 years old.
That's another thing that
a kid living in a trailer in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh.
Got to give it up for
Pittsburgh.
For that.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. And he started sending scripts to Mort Weisinger, and Mort bought them. And Mort was a prick of the highest degree, and he treated all of his creators bad. And I'm sure he especially treated Jim bad, because Jim was a kid who wouldn't fight back. But this guy was turning out those Legion of Superhero stories and those Superman stories at 13, 14, 15 years old.
Yep.
That, were better than anything I was writing at 24. So, hey, he knew what he was doing. He could write a story. He could run a company. He could kick you in the head if that's what it needed to get the job done. But yeah.
Arguably, he set the Legion on the path to the popularity that they later, enjoyed.
He was the guy who gave them a continuity.
Absolutely. Yes.
Carrie and what, Hamilton?
He was drawing too, wasn't he handing in like full drawings of his script?
Yeah, he would do. I don't know if he did it all the time, but he would do layouts on boards. Or and with John Forte drawing it, I guess it doesn't matter what you get, because everybody's going to be, But it's just he contributed a lot to comics. There was his Marvels. There was the Valiant. There was whatever. He did it.
Also, to put more context on what you were saying about having to get the trains to run on time, a lot of the writers had also been not only editors of their own books, but even times as editor-in-chief. So clearly they had their own ways of deciding how management should run and how their own comics and just in general how things could run. But also, ironic timing. I mean, it's going to be another 2 years, but eventually we'll get Marvel Secret Wars. And of course, that was based on Jim's original story. And luckily, I only interviewed him once. Talked to him a few times at conventions. At Terrificon, Mitch was kind enough to set me up with him, just me and him. And it was a full education, even in just that short 50 minutes of the way he thought about things and the way he laid out stories and his ideas when the toy line came to him and said, yeah, we're doing this thing with the figures, come up with a story. Well, just like Crisis at DC, Secret Wars is one of the hallmark Marvel epic stories of the 80s.
Yep.
You know? So, no, big loss, and I'm really sorry. I was really hoping to have more conversations with Jim, and I won't deny my selfish reasons, but really, no, we've lost a giant, very much polarizing, as the guys have said, but you can't deny the body of work. And again, as Paul said, I was going to say it if Paul didn't, to start at 13 and literally understand what his peer readers wanted. And obviously, as shitty as Weisinger was to him, there was your mini focus group right there, man, Jim Shooter, and giving you exactly what the kids wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tough stuff, man. Well, all right. I don't want to end on a downer. We can we could brighten up a bit and also point to the fact that this is a fantastic book and absolutely should be on everyone's radar. And it's a great dose of comic book history from really learned guys who can give you a very, very good perspective. I mean, truly, all these Will Murray. We mentioned Keith. We mentioned Brevoort. Of course, Paul. You got a lot of great people here, man, and congratulations on that, Jim. Like I said, your histories are always fascinating to get, and this is no exception. Give us the title again. Forgive me, I don't have it handy.
Jack of all comics, a fan conversation about the king of comics.
There you go. I don't think he'll ever be dethroned as for being the king. That's really going to be a forever
thing. I talk about
thing.
that in the introduction too. That the people who have tried to say, oh well, I think it's really this. I mean, God love Will Eisner and whoever else, but it. And I say it you can read it in the introduction. It all comes down to influence to me. Who influenced the industry more than anybody else, and to me, it's Jack.
Yeah.
He deserves that title, and may he forever be the king.
Final thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, well, I was once I was having a conversation with Jim Steranko at a show, and we were talking about stuff, and we got around to Kirby, and I said, yeah, he kind of created the visual language of comics, and Steranko went, no, he didn't. And I said, then who did? And he kind of went, I think, okay, never mind. We'll
what I loved was a couple of years ago, Alex Ross did that wonderful Fantastic Four Full Circle story that essentially was a sequel to Jack's iconic This Man, This Monster story. And, I mean, and it's funny because obviously there are nods to Norman Rockwell and Neil Adams in Alex's style. But I think from a dynamism, I'm probably saying it wrong there, but everyone knows what I'm trying to say. But no, that the energy and everything that all came from Jack, and I know how important it was for him to make it feel like a Kirby descendant in that specific thing. Yeah. And then also even little moments like when Wade and Ringo were doing the Fantastic Four, and they killed off Ben Grimm, and Ben goes to heaven, and who's God? Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fantastic it's those kinds of tributes that, again, 31 years after his passing and stuff that we're still seeing, because the comic fans, we don't forget, and also that he's finally getting his due as a legitimate co-creator. To Stan, I'm with you, by the way, Jim. I like Stan Lee, and you can't deny Stan's contributions. Yeah. But it is good that the artists are finally getting their due as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Guys, great talk. Truly, I'm so glad of the place we went to. And also, I thought we left enough on the table to entice people to buy Jim's book.
I would hope so.
I would hope so too.
Any other projects coming up, Paul?
Well, I'm interviewing for the next for my next book of histories. I've been talking to mostly writers, it seems, this time about how they do what they do. So, you know, talked to about a half a dozen people so far. Going to get a few more and make another book.
Attaboy. I'm following in your footsteps, Paul. I told you that off the air.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, you've got a treasure trove. I mean, you've got this amazing treasure trove
Well,
of history.
let's not sell your library short either, Paul, because
Oh no, mine's
truly
fucking amazing, but yours is good too.
it is amazing.
Get a room.
No, man, honestly, people, if you haven't read Paul's incredible Direct Currents and
Direct
what are the other
conversation.
titles, Paul?
There's direct comments, direct conversations, and direct creativity.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
That's fantastic, man.
I talked to like
Paul
I
also wrote the finest JSA novel ever, and to this day, one of my most favorite superhero novels of all. Yeah.
Could not agree more. What's the title of that JSA book, Paul?
JSA Ragnarok.
Yes, indeed. And
Available.
also your look at the 50s as when kind of a nod to some of the guys that had
Oh yeah.
tough deaths.
The-
Sad true story?
no, it's called The Same Old Story.
Same old story, excuse me.
Right. And it's a novel set in the comic business in the early 1950s, and the murder victim is essentially Bob Kanigher because everybody wanted to kill Bob. Um,
Oh no.
oh yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Again, another guy I loved. He was impossible. He was a pompous egotist who would just like he had disdain for everything. But man, like I could talk to him for hours.
Isn't
I
it
believe
funny how those kinds of guys always, have popped up through the comic industry,
Yeah,
throughout its history? It really is.
yeah.
But if you take them out, then is the industry the same anymore? I
Of
mean,
course not.
No, and Kanigher, yeah. Aside from his personality, it's like Jesus. His writing contributions are epic and
yeah,
legend.
Indeed.
dude was prolific.
He
Yes.
could write any genre.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. No, he
Yeah.
was real. Again, his body of work speaks for itself,
Yeah.
and he'd be happy to tell you and I guess
At,
add to that.
at the drop of a at the drop of a hat.
I talked about him in my book on the Brave and the Bold, and it was really interesting to delve into some of that stuff. And then there's Bob Haney, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Oh
Another
yeah.
one, another great guy.
Yep.
In fact, his advice to me was gave me the name of my comic book career memoir, panel by panel. I said as a kid, I go, all right, Bob, how do you do it? What's the secret? He goes, there's no secret. Just write it page by page, panel by panel.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Okay.
great.
Yeah.
Guys, honestly, thank you for the body of books that you have put out there.
Thank you.
Because as I said, it's really important for people to get the straight story. And listen, of course, there are personal points of view that will enter into each of yours work. But again, Paul, you were there. And
Yeah.
and Jim, you're getting guys who are also there or also,
Mm-hmm.
again, have really spent the time to really go beyond
Yep.
schmucks like me that are just, well, I think, what the thing about Jim Aparo is, yeah, shut up, Suntress. You don't know what you're talking
Okay,
about.
so wait, you're a slob, a jerk, and a schmuck. Okay, I got it.
Yeah,
What the
yeah.
hell are we doing on this Losers podcast?
I know, SJS. Slob Jerk Schmuck, exactly. It's on my business card, gentlemen. Thank you, as always, for your time.
Thank
and
you, John. It's been a lot of fun.
continued success. Paul, I know I'll see you at Terrificon in a month or so.
Yep.
Have
And
fun,
Jim, I don't know
guys.
if you're going to be there.
No, I wish, but no. I'll be
Okay.
at Pulp Fest in August.
What city is that in?
It's in Mars, Pennsylvania, just right outside of Pittsburgh. The show's been running for many, many years. It is the show for me of my entire year, and that my tribe is there, the pulp writers
Oh,
and
yeah.
the fans and everything. We just have Steranko's always there. He's always walking around that show, and we
Playing the
just
shadow
love seeing him every year.
Does
Just
Jerry?
shadow covers. Yeah.
Does Jerry come out anymore? Conway, because he used to come to the Chicago show, despite him being on the West Coast, and it always made me happy.
I don't think Jerry's up for a lot of traveling these days. So
Okay,
Tony Isabella used to go to that
nice.
show, but I don't think he's been there the last 1 or 2 years.
Okay, all right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Everybody, thanks for watching and listening. More great Word Balloon Live coming this week. Until then, everybody, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.